Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to a brand new installment in our Reviewed and Ranked series. As you already know, this is the series where we break down the moves and abilities of each character on the Marvel Ultimate Alliance 3 roster, and then assign them a ranking based off of just how useful they are when building your perfect team. Now, if you haven't seen any of the previous installments, please make sure you go back through and check those out, as they do have some bearing in the ending of these videos in terms of where they actually fit in with the ranking, as there are some minor spoilers at the end there. And as a reminder, we are doing this for the entire cast, and we are not even 10% of the way in. So make sure you're subscribed to the channel if you're not, to ensure that you never miss the upcoming videos in this series and all the other videos that I do on a daily basis as well. But without dragging this on any longer, we need to talk about today's topic, Daredevil. Daredevil is a very interesting character within this roster, mainly because of his dynamics and how he works as a character. I think he's a ton of fun to play as, and brings some very, very unique items to the team when it comes to confronting any and all types of enemies. But before we can really talk about those abilities and what his attacks look like, we of course need to touch on his synergies and what he brings to the table there. He actually has a decently rounded set of synergies with 6 available synergies that he can incorporate from a team building standpoint. And the first few are defensive synergies with the new Avengers and Defenders, increasing the team's defense capacity. There is also the mastery capacities of Agile Fighters and Marvel Knights that will increase the mastery section of the team building. He then has an energy mastery with the team leaders synergy, and finally the strength mastery with the martial arts synergy. So a very solid character with the synergies that he brings to the table from his team building standpoint. We can now cross over and talk about the basic attacks in his kit, starting with his standard combo. Now, Daredevil's standard combo, it's a little bit longer than some of the other ones that we've seen. It has a collective of 5 different hits that takes him out in a pretty linear progression that can be influenced marginally based off of where you're throwing out those attacks. And as opposed to some of the other characters that we've seen on this roster, it will inflict a degree of hit stun to some of the weaker grunt type enemies, allowing you to barrel through large groups of enemies should you choose to use your basic attack instead of one of your abilities, which we'll touch on in just a few minutes. His heavy attack likewise has that stagger and knockdown effect. It involves a outward forward lunge with his baton, specifically with the chain element of that baton, as he can extend that for a maximum reach that slams down onto the ground and will knock enemies back out and out of the way. So that is a quite handy heavy attack to do. You may be able to get away with chaining that onto your regular combo, but do keep in mind that because of the extended reach of the heavy attack, you may very well end up missing a lot of the characters you were hitting with your standard basic attack sequence. Daredevil is a very agile character, and likewise he does have a double jump, which is pretty consistent with the good chunk of the cast that we've seen so far. That means that he will be highly beneficial for traversing a lot of the floor puzzles such as laser grids and other obstacles that are strewn about the battlefield. His falling aerial is one of the least graceful ones that I've seen so far. I don't think that this one's particularly well designed, but it's not the end of the world really, because you're never really going to be in a position where you would need to use Daredevil's falling aerial anyway, as none of his abilities send him soaring up into the air to make this an easy attack to use. It looks like it honestly is kind of an awkward landing for Daredevil, but at the end of the day, you're really only going to be using this attack in the upmost pinches, and maybe if you end up falling down from a higher ledge onto the battlefield where the majority of the rest of the roster is located. And before moving on and talking about his abilities, we need to briefly showcase his block and dodge animation, where Daredevil crosses the batons out in front of his head as the initial block, and then performs the standard somersault based off of your directional input. Very standard, gets the job done, and not the worst looking animation in the game by any means. Getting into Daredevil's abilities, we come to the first ability that he has being Vigilante Justice. This attack involves Daredevil connecting both batons and then performing a forward spinning attack. This actually has a decent amount of range to it as well. It is one of those attacks that takes place immediately as soon as you initiate the attack. It's not one that you need to charge or continue to tap. It will just detonate when you choose to employ the attack, either in its standard format or in an attack synergy setting. The attack is a melee type, has the charge attribute synergy to it, has a decent amount of damage, is decently conservative on its EP consumption, and is a great tool for bursting down stagger gauges of mighty enemies and bosses. It also allows him to cover a little bit of ground. If he finds himself surrounded by a couple of enemies, it will give him a little bit of a burst movement option that will also deal damage as he moves through those opponents. As you rank up this attack, it will benefit from having a reduced energy point cost, have an increased attack damage, increased damage done to the stagger gauge, and having a reduced chance of being interrupted on startup. The second ability in Daredevil's kit is the Billy Club Blitz. This is an attack that you can continue to carry out by pressing the button repeatedly, and this involves a flurry of chained baton attacks that take place primarily in the front of Daredevil's character, though it does extend out a little bit to the sides. This has a very high amount of damage that it deals out, having an A classification, but it suffers severely in the stagger environment. So if you're looking to take on a group of small grunts that are in the area, this is a very good attack to use, and it's decently conservative on its AP consumption as well. This, rather than having the melee attribute, it actually has the piercing attribute attached to it, which I find very interesting given that the batons do not have a serrated or spiked edge, but rather are kind of blunt objects. So I don't know that I agree with it being labeled as piercing, but who am I to change what it is actually classified as? It does have the barrage synergy trait attached to it, and as you continue to rank up this ability, it will have a reduced energy point cost, have an increase in its attack damage, an increase in the damage done to stagger gauges, though not by a whole lot, and finally having a reduced chance of the attack being interrupted on startup. The third ability that Daredevil possesses is the Blind Fury. This works a little bit similarly to the Billy Club Blitz, but instead of just being directly in front of Daredevil as his character, this has both batons connected and twirled around him in a 360-degree area, so effectively covering more ground. It does have the trade-off of not being as high on the damage front. It does do a little bit better against the stagger gauges and is a decently conservative attack on its energy point consumption. This, again, has the melee attack type, similar to Vigilante Justice, and the synergy trait is the area assault, and this is the first time that we are seeing this particular synergy trait exhibited within the cast, as this is the first attack that we're seeing that has a full range of effect and attack power as it takes place in all directions around the character. As you rank up this ability, it will have a reduced energy point cost, an increase in the attack damage dealt, an increase done to the stagger gauge as well, and finally a reduced chance of the attack being interrupted. One thing to note about this Blind Fury ability, real quick before moving on to his final ability, is that final hit when you do eventually stop pressing the button does have a little bit of what appears to be an extended range to knock back any of the characters that were stuck within that barrage as you are unleashing it. So it does definitely have a benefit to its use in combat. The fourth ability that Daredevil possesses is not an attack, and similar to what we saw with the Super Soldier's ability from Captain America, it cannot be synergized, but the difference is it doesn't even have an attack type, whereas Captain America had the launch attack attributed to his Super Soldier's ability. It doesn't deal any damage, it doesn't do anything to the stagger gauge, and its EP consumption is pretty consistent with the other abilities that we've seen in Daredevil's kit. However, though this is not an ability that deals any sort of damage, it does greatly enhance your damage output, as anywhere that you see that red ring emanate out from Daredevil's character, any opponent that is caught within that burst will have their defense decreased. And this works for the entire team that you've brought into battle, and it even works on the boss characters, even the really big, bulky bosses such as Sandman and Surtur. They really have large bodies that are very susceptible to this ability and will thus take more damage from the attacks being unleashed upon them after Daredevil has activated his radar sense. I highly recommend this ability, as no matter what team buildup you are working with, this will always increase the overall efficiency and effectiveness of any attacks that you dole out with any members of your team. The benefits of ranking up this ability includes a reduced energy point consumption and increased effectiveness, and thus making the opponents even more weak and susceptible to your attacks, as well as an increase in the ability duration and a reduced chance of the attack being interrupted on startup. And as you can see here, at its full potency, the radar sense effect lasts for about 15 seconds, closer to 15 and a half seconds on any opponents that are caught within that initial range. And yes, this does synergize very, very well with Captain America's Super Soldier ability, as you can benefit from both an increased attack within your team and a decreased defense within the opponents that you are facing off against. Now, for Daredevil's extreme ability attack, this is a very efficient move that has a very quick startup, deals damage throughout the entire duration, and is over in about a 5-second span. So it's not one of the more drawn out synergies. It's not one of the more drawn out extreme attacks within the entire roster. It kind of looks like a combination of the Billy Club Blitz and Blind Fury with increased range compared to those two base abilities, and has a decent area of effect when used. One important thing to note about this extreme ability is you will need to position yourself as close to as many enemies or mini bosses as you can in order to get the maximum amount of damage out of this, as once Daredevil starts that move, he is stuck there. He does not move, he does not adjust to get any closer to his opponents after the move has been initiated. It will just take place exactly from where he is standing. So with everything having been considered here, we need to determine where Daredevil fits within the character ranking. And you've probably already guessed that I have very high opinions of Daredevil based off of how we've discussed and talked about his abilities in today's video. So it should come as no surprise that I will be placing Daredevil within the A tier. But since we are trying to have some sort of relative order to the characters within the tiers, we now need to determine where he goes within this ranking. And, well, Captain America is a really good character, but he only has one ability that synergizes from an attacking standpoint. I guess he has two that can synergize, but from an attacking standpoint, he doesn't really have as many damage dealing abilities as Daredevil does, and Daredevil has the ability to further augment the damage that is being dealt to the characters that he comes in contact with. So I think it's appropriate for us to move Cap over slightly and insert Daredevil right before Cap within this ranking. So let's go ahead and place him there and then move Cap over so he's a little bit closer, and we can leave further room for this character ranking table as needed, and we might need to expand the table out depending on just how saturated some of these ranks get. But what do you think? Do you think that I ranked him too high? Do you think I ranked him too low? Do you think he fits in right about where he belongs? Is there anything about this character that I've missed or have not touched on? Be sure to let me know any and all of those things in the comment section down below. But until then, thanks again for watching, and I hope that you have an absolutely fantastic rest of your day.